Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Career Successes Team's How to Get Hired webinar series, our very first one of the quarter. Now, this evening, Elton Rego from Viva Systems and a recent UCSC alumni from 2018 will walk you through the process of how to get hired in software engineering from his personal experience. We hope you receive some helpful information from today's webinar. If questions arise, please type them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. At the end of the presentation, we'll take 15 minutes to answer as many questions as possible. Now I would like to pass it over to Elton and we'll get this going, and I'll see you at the end of the presentation.
Thanks, Taylor. All right, first of all, thank you everyone for joining. I see 52 people. That's awesome to see, and I really appreciate it. Today I'll be talking a little bit about how to get hired in software engineering. And yeah, just a little bit about what I'm going to cover. I'll talk a little bit about how hiring works at Viva, which is the company I currently work at, what recruiters look for, what engineers like myself are interviewing for when we have the chance to chat with you, and what hiring managers do when they're making decisions. And I'll try to back all of this up with some anecdotes and stories so that way it's not super boring the whole time, just talking about dense information. So before I get started on everything, I'll talk a little bit about who I am. My name is Elton. I graduated in 2018 from UC Santa Cruz with a double major in computer science and business management economics. This is in no means what you need to get hired in software engineering, but I just got really lucky throughout my 4 years of college and had the opportunity to intern with PG&E, Hewlett-Packard Enterprise, and Viva before I started working full-time. Founded a startup back in college, which absolutely tanked, was not a good idea, but I learned a ton from that experience. And I think this page here is more just a way for me to back up the fact that I'm not actually a recruiter and just show that I've been through the hiring process a bunch of times, and that's really where my experience comes from and what I'll be speaking about. So that being said, let's talk about the current situation with hiring and kind of what's going on. First off, I did a quick search on Indeed to kind of look what's out there related to computer science and software engineering and tech in general. There's really two main roles in software engineering, and that's going to be product management and software. Product management is more for the type of person who wants to be client-side facing. So you'll be talking to the actual customers, the clients, the people that are using your software, and you'll be creating design specifications and really outlining what the product is going to be. Software engineers, the jobs on the top, are going to be more for people who really want to put their head down and code out a system. So you want to design the architecture, you want to work through the algorithms, and you really want to flesh out how everything works. These two roles work really closely together, which is why I have both of them. And right out of college, you can go into either one. What I'll be talking about today is primarily software engineering, as that's really where I have a lot of my experience. But I do work with a ton of product managers, and I am kind of a product person myself, so please feel free to ask questions about that as well. So like I said, a ton of candidates, or there are a ton of jobs open in computer science for both product management and software engineering. However, this happens a lot, and this is an actual screenshot from when I applied to Uber back in 2018 when I graduated. Yeah, despite there being a ton of jobs, you will get rejections all the time, and this just seems like it's the case, right? There's kind of a mismatch. Ton of jobs open, ton of rejections at the same time. So it creates a sense of like, oh, what are companies looking for? And to back that up, the situation is even worse or different now because of COVID-19 and a lot of the shelter in place and lockdown ordinances. A lot of companies have put freezes on hiring, which makes it very difficult to kind of know when you apply whether or not that company is actually going to get back to you or not. The good news is there is actually a company called Candor, and just a little bit about them. They do salary negotiation stuff, which is super not important. but they have a live spreadsheet here of all of the active hiring freezes, layoffs, everything going on in kind of the tech space or just in general. I don't think this is 100% limited to tech, but it's really easy. You can kind of just search for a company. For example, I'll search for Viva here, and it'll tell you what the status is for them. So I think that that's a cool, useful resource given the current situation. But yeah, because of COVID and kind of everything that's going on with a lot of the competition for internships and full-time work offers have become a lot more competitive and harsh. And it can be really difficult to kind of gauge whether or not the company is a good fit for you without physically meeting with those people. A lot of that interaction and whether or not you feel like that company is a good fit happens in person. So this is actually a quote from our senior recruiter for the university programs. He told me that one of the hardest things when you're hiring is actually finding qualified candidates for the positions that are open. And really that's why that mismatch happens, right? A lot of the times they're putting out positions that seem to ask for pretty crazy things. And that's going to be one of the things that I talk about later, is really reading through what they're looking for and making sure that you line up with that. But the quote really begs the question, what does qualified mean, right? Are companies looking for internships? Are they looking for student orgs? Are they looking for projects? Are they looking for like past experiences or jobs or anything that you've done prior to that? And the answer is, it's kind of like a mixed bag of everything, because companies are really looking for someone who fits the role that they have to fit. When you're applying to jobs, you are applying to be someone who can like do that job and show up to work every day and really perform. And really that's what the company is trying to look for, is someone who can do that. And especially in tech, someone who fits in with like their culture. So before you apply, you really want to ask yourself a bunch of questions. And this is kind of the checklist that I go through when I'm talking to a company or when I'm considering applying to a company. And I highly recommend that you ask yourself these questions as well. Question one, do you enjoy the work? So is the role that they're asking for, be it software engineer or product manager or UX design, is that job something that you really truly enjoy? Because it's going to be something you're doing for at least 8 hours a day, every day during the week, and possibly on the weekends if something breaks. What do you yourself want to get out of the position, right? Do you want to get promoted a bunch? Do you want to make a ton of money? Like, do you want to learn? Do you want to learn about the technology specifically? Do you want to learn about the industry? Like, all of that is really important to understand even before you apply. And the reason these questions are important is not only so that you're making an informed decision, but it's also so that you have a really strong understanding of what to answer when they ask you interview questions, because a lot of this will come into play. Are you willing to learn their stack? So if they're working in React, but you just absolutely hate it and you for some reason want to work in Angular, like, probably shouldn't apply to that role. Similar things for backend, right? Like, understand that if a company has a specific stack, you're not going to come in and change the whole stack. Like, you should be willing to learn what they're working with. Are you able to do the baseline things that they require? Usually every position will have kind of a qualification section, and then they'll have like a nice to have section. You should be able to meet, I would say, about 80 to 90% of what is the need to have, what's in the need to have section or the qualification section. And that's what I mean by, like, do you have the baseline things that they require? What will your career growth look at the company? So a lot of companies look really great on paper, and like, you will enjoy the job, they have a really cool product, but sometimes like it's really hard to get promoted or move around in that company, and that can feel really limiting for a lot of people. So that's a really important question to ask yourself. And then finally, what is your overall reason for applying, right? Is it because you like their tech? Is it because you like what they're building? Do you like the impact that they have? Like, that fundamental understanding is going to be asked of you so much. Like, why do you want to work at this company? What about this company is, cool to you? Like, these are questions that people are going to ask you. And so really understanding your reason for applying is going to be critical as you go into the application and interview process. Which brings me to the process itself. Pretty much every tech company is going to follow the same hiring formula across the board. It might be a little bit varied, but for the most part, it's going to be an initial phone screen with like the recruiter. And that's basically just going to be them going over your resume, kind of understanding what you're looking for. And that's going to be more in line of like, what do they have open for you possibly? The technical phone screen with an engineer. So this is going to be your first coding question. If you're going for software engineering, it's going to be a design question. If you're going for product management, or even more of a design question if you're going for like UX design. And then you have on-site interviews. And this is going to be where you meet with multiple people who are potentially on your team or you would be working with, including the recruiter that you've been talking to and the hiring manager that would be your manager if you got hired. In general, this is kind of how everything's going to flow. The only differences are sometimes you'll do a technical phone screen and you will also get like a take-home project or maybe just a take-home project. There have been a couple of interviews that I've done where I did a take-home project and then I came into the interview for my on-site and just did more of the project on site. And it was kind of a cool way to feel out what it would be like working at that company. So in general, this is kind of what it's going to look like. So let's break it down and translate it. So that initial phone screen is going to be more like, are you who you say you are, right? Like, does your resume make sense? Do you actually back up the fact that like you did these things? Because you will be surprised how many people lie on their resume. Are you looking for like what the company is doing? And kind of like all of these questions encompass what the recruiter is looking for in that initial phone screen. Overall, kind of the big question that our end or the hiring end of this process is trying to answer is, will you be able to work in the environments of the company? And that's kind of the question that you want to answer with yes. So the recruiter call. This is that initial phone screen where they're going to go over your resume and talk to you about what you've done and what you're looking for. A lot of people think that this is a very like behavioral kind of interview. It's actually not. It's more about the recruiter trying to figure out if you're going to be able to succeed in the rest of the process. You should treat this as if like the recruiter is a good friend of yours and try to get as much information about what the process is going to be like. Ask questions, show interest about the company, and figure out if the company is a good fit for you, right? If you are a design-focused person, you're a front-end person, and this company does like hardcore server architecture, this is probably the point where you should figure that out, because you don't want to go through the whole interview process and just tank because of that, right? And you'll realize that that's not a fun situation to be in. That's obviously a very extreme example, but yeah. From our point of view, or the recruiter's point of view, I say our, but from a recruiter's point of view, does this person seem like a good fit for the open roles, or can they hold a conversation about the projects they've done? Both of these questions are really important for the recruiter to answer. First one I talked a little bit about in the previous slide, but the second one is super, super important. It's great if you understand really the intricacies of how the technologies work that the company is using, or how to really build out a scalable system. But if you can't communicate or hold a conversation about that, that's like a big red flag, because you're going to be working with a larger team, and kind of being a lone wolf doesn't really work in a corporate or company setting. So having a conversation about the projects you've done does two things. It shows that you can kind of talk technically, which is really important, but it also shows that you actually played a part in that project, right? Because if you put down a project where you kind of like barely did anything, you're not going to really be able to hold a full conversation about, you know, why certain decisions were made or why you went down a certain path, right? So this is really what the recruiter is looking for. Which brings us to the second step, which is going to be the technical screen. I'm going to talk specifically about like a phone screen here. In some cases, you would do like a take-home project, but for the phone screen, you're going to want to use the information from the recruiter call. Sometimes the recruiter will tell you exactly what kind of topics they're going to cover in an interview. For example, I've interviewed at a couple of companies where the recruiter straight up told me that I will be working with like tree traversal, right? So I just have to practice some tree algorithms and make sure I understand, you know, breadth first search and depth first search, etc. Using that information that the recruiter tells you is critical here, because it'll give you kind of like an upper edge on like your competition. It's critical to practice a bunch, and I mean, get on LeetCode, get on HackerRank, like do a bunch of practice problems and really familiarize yourself with like thinking through and communicating a problem. And I guess I kind of just mentioned it, but communication is really, really important here. You're going to be talking over the phone with someone, and they're really trying to analyze whether or not you understand things technically. So think through what you're talk through what you're thinking about, and really talk about everything you're doing. I like to think of it as like, imagine you are Morgan Freeman and you are narrating your own actions throughout this entire phone screen. The more you talk, the better it's going to come across. So that's very important here. From our end, what we're really looking for is, can you approach the problem efficiently? So if I give you like a specific algorithmic problem, like how are you thinking about that approach? Like, are you thinking about it from a test case point of view? Are you thinking about it from a scalability point of view? That's really important. That first question kind of changes based on what the company is, but efficiently is really what people are looking for. Do you manage your time well, right? If you get 60 minutes to complete a question, like, are you aware of the time that you have? Like, are you thinking through like, okay, let me get a solution done first, and then like optimize it as I get closer towards the end? Or are you just trying to rush through things or do things very slowly or not really take time into account? Managing your time is critical here. Talked about communication a little bit already, but being able to communicate technically is very important. And really just dealing with the pressure of only having 60 minutes to solve a problem. And that is super important. I think one of the things that I've experienced personally is that companies aren't necessarily looking for you to actually solve everything. Sometimes the questions that they'll ask you in a technical phone screen or even in an on-site will be specifically designed to not be solved in the allotted time that they've given you. And in those cases, they're really looking for, how do you deal with those situations? And I tell this story all the time, and I think Taylor has heard it like probably 3 times already. But when I was interviewing at Viva and I went through like my on-sites, I didn't answer any of the questions correctly at all. I straight up tanked all of the technical questions that they gave me. And the reason that I was offered a position, and the reason that the senior engineers still tell me they made a decision for yes, given that information, was the fact that I dealt with that situation differently than any other candidate they'd seen. And the way I did it was, when they asked me a question that I seriously just didn't know how to start with, I just asked them like, okay, I was very upfront, like, I don't know how to start. What is your recommendation? How would you approach this problem? And I turned the interview back on them and worked with them to figure out a way to solve the issue. How you deal with pressure, whether or not you break down or you try to be positive and figure out a way to find the solution, even if it's not just your own technical knowledge, is really important. Because someone with a good attitude, who is willing to learn, is way better than someone who knows everything that has a horrible attitude. So that's really important here. Okay, so I talked a little bit about preparing earlier, but these are some great resources for preparing for both your technical phone screens and for your on-site interviews. I went through pretty much all of these when I was looking for my next role. First is Cracking the Coding Interview. You will hear that a ton. It's basically like the go-to guide. Like, you want to memorize Cracking the Coding Interview. It will walk you through everything you need to know. It's got practice problems, it's got algorithms, it's got system design questions. I think even the newer version has some stuff on like basic UX, but it's pretty much top notch. LeetCode is great for getting a bunch of problems, same with HackerRank. Just getting coding questions that you can answer, and try to scale yourself up, like start with easy problems until you basically don't have to think about them anymore, then move on to mediums, and then eventually hards. The subreddit CS career questions is great. I would be a little bit wary of asking questions there. I mean, it's a great resource just to kind of like read through. But I've also found that there are a lot of people on that subreddit that just talk without any experience. So just kind of take things with a grain of salt, but kind of use it more just to see what people's thoughts are in general, rather than like solid advice. And then friends and coworkers are really useful, right? If you have people that you know that work in the industry, they're going to be a great way to practice your mock interviews or practice coding questions, or really talk through like what you're thinking when you're doing this process. So use the resources that are there. So yeah, the last step is always going to be an on-site interview. No one's going to hire you without you coming on site, except for now, because you can't really come on site. You'll probably do a virtual on-site, but it's going to be like pretty much a whole day. You'll come in the morning and you'll probably leave sometime in the afternoon, and you will most likely grab lunch with the team. So you're going to want to approach it like it's a work day, like really show up and show that you can come to work and do the job that they're expecting you to do. This is also something that you're going to want to practice for, and you'll see practice a ton here, because practice is really what's going to make you more confident when you get technical questions and have to answer specific questions on site. And so if I go back, do you remember the questions that I was talking about earlier that you want to ask yourself before you apply? Those come into play here. Understanding what you really want to do and what you want to work on at the company is going to be critical, because every single interview will ask you, why do you want to work at this company? What is it about this product that attracts you? What do you know about our industry? Like, do you know about our competitors, right? These are questions that are very fair game for any kind of on-site interview. So that's why that understanding of what your motive is very important. Know your resume. Like, make sure you know everything that's on your resume, what your past jobs were if you've had them, what your projects are. Make sure you can talk about each and every point on that. A thing that I used to do when I was interviewing a lot was I would make a table of everything on my resume. So I would make a table for each of my jobs. I would make it, and each row would be a job or a project or some kind of experience that I had, and then each column would be like a situational question about that. So for example, for every job, I could have a column for challenges that I had, places where I got to show leadership, places where I had a disagreement with like a team member and how I dealt with that, right? Like making a table like that and just having stories for each of those situations is a cool way to prep for those behavioral questions. Knowing your projects kind of falls in there as well. And then make sure you prepare questions for the company as well. At the end of every interview, there's going to be some time where they're going to ask you like, hey, do you have any questions for us? And this is something that I think is often overlooked, where you're interviewing the company just as much as they're interviewing you. So having questions prepared for them is very important. From our point of view, right, it's can you think critically? For each of the problems that we give you from an engineer's point of view, are you able to analyze that problem in the way that someone on your team would, or I would, right? That's what we mean by like, can you think critically? And it's not necessarily like, oh, do we think about this problem the same way? It's more like, are you able to analyze it on a deeper level than just like the information we give you? Do you fit with the company culture? I think that this is something really important to like the tech industry in general, but like every company will have like a specific culture, and really understanding that before you go into an interview is important, because from our point of view, we're looking for someone that fits within that culture. Are you a long-term hire? So this is always going to be something that comes up, which is like, from the company's point of view, do you seem like someone who would stay at the company for like 3, 4, 5 onward years, right? For the most part, companies are going to try to hire people that will stay around for longer, because it costs money to hire people and train people and onboard people. So really, companies are looking for long-term hires. So making yourself appear that way even if that's not really your intention, is not necessarily being deceitful. It's more just that is what they're looking for. And then finally, you're going to be meeting with individual people. And the question that every one of those individual people is going to be kind of trying to answer is like, do I, as in the person interviewing you, want to work with you? And as long as you can answer all of those questions with yes, then most likely you will get hired. And I talked a little bit about this earlier, but often overlooked is the fact that you are interviewing the company just as much as they're interviewing you. As a new grad, it can be really easy to get into the mindset of like, you'll take anything that comes to you. And while I totally understand, because I definitely had that mentality too when I was graduating, it's really important to analyze all of the companies you're applying to and interviewing at. You want to make sure that it's a good fit for you just as much as it is for them. So, when people are interviewing you, see what it's like to ask them questions and how they respond to that. See kind of when you go on site, look around you and kind of get an understanding of what the company is like in general, just on a day-to-day basis, right? Like, are people seemingly enjoying themselves? Like, is there like a cool office setup if that's important to you? Like, how casual are people? Like, all of that kind of second, I guess, kind of soft stuff is not really something that people actively think about a lot, but it's really important and could play a key factor in how you make a decision if you receive multiple offers. So keep that in mind, right? Every time you are doing an interview, you're interviewing that company just as much as they are interviewing you. Which means you really got to ask yourself, like, what are you looking for? I kind of talked a little bit about this earlier, but do you like the people you're interacting with? Like, the person you talked to on the phone, were they easy to understand, in the sense that, like, when you ask a question, they were able to answer it in a way that someone that was newer or just out of college would understand? Do you like where the company is located? That can be really important, right? If you want to live in San Diego, but a company is located in Mountain View, probably not the best company for you. Do you like the product that they make? If you want to work in consumer space and they strictly make like business to business or government technology, probably not the best company for you. Do you like their stack? Talked a bit about that earlier. And the culture. These are things that you want to really know what you're looking for before you go into the process and as you are talking to companies. And that might actually change, right? Like, you might talk to specific companies that you thought you would align really well with based on what you know, but as you talk to them, like, that kind of changes. So don't be afraid to have these answers kind of shift around a little bit. All right, here's the meat. Tips to succeed. So how are you going to succeed in all of these? In your resume, really, really important, include metrics. Everyone wants to know how you impacted whatever you were working on, right? So if you built like an automation script that improved time by like 40%, like, write that on your resume. Write down that you improved time by 40%. If you can in any way show quantifiable ways you created impact, that's golden. So that was like an example for like jobs. If you did like a side project, right, you can write quantifiably like how many users you had at any given point in time. If it was some kind of system that did that, you could talk about any impact that your project had on like what you learned in school, right? Your metrics don't necessarily have to be impact to a company, is what I'm trying to say here, but try to include quantifiable things in general. Link everything back to the impact and highlight the value are kind of the same thing here, but it's really just prove on your resume with words that you are creating value for everything that you've done. And what I mean by that is, if you've worked in a company as like an intern, right, did you create value for that team instead of just, taking information and learning, right? Was that something that you also gave back in the sense that you built something that the company still uses? Even if that's not the case, try to find some way to highlight the fact that you've created value for that company. Or same thing with projects, like I mentioned earlier. Okay, point number 4 sounds really common sense, but you would be surprised how many resumes we get that either have missing or incorrect contact information. And I mean, you could be a really great candidate, but if we can't reach out to you, you're probably not going to get a job. So make sure you check your contact information. First of all, make sure it's there. And second of all, make sure that it's up to date and correct. And I think the last bit here is something that I learned from Taylor and John at the Career Center, but it's run your resume through a website like JobScan, which is going to basically do what the algorithm is going to do when you apply online and pick out the bits from your resume. So this is a good way to see if your resume is going to get flagged as green in whatever algorithm they are using, but it's also a cool way to see like how that algorithm works if that's interesting to you. So doing that will help you kind of improve your resume in a way that will help you when you're applying to jobs online. Okay, tips for succeeding in your interviews. So if someone asks you a question, a lot of times I'll see candidates talk through like a solution, like talk through approaching a solution, and then before they even talk through that solution, they will start to like optimize it and like talk about edge cases. It's really important that when you're given a question, just if you have a solution to it, or if you get to a solution to it, like talk that out and say like, here's one way to solve it. Even if it's really slow and it's a brute force solution, say a solution. From there, you can optimize. Once you have a solution down, it's really easy to kind of look at it and pick out parts that are inefficient or even kind of gut it and go to a next solution. But getting a solution is really important, and then you optimize. Once you've done that, you can highlight language-specific knowledge. You've probably noticed that I gave a lot of front-end examples. It's because I'm a front-end person. So I'm just going to continue with it because that's really what my experience is. So if I'm doing like a JavaScript interview, right, and they ask me to find an item within an array, or in some case like that comes up during the interview, I can talk about the fact that like index of searches work with every browser versus and includes function call only works in modern browsers above IE11. So depending on what the company is looking for, right, highlighting specific language knowledge in that area could be really important. I wouldn't also go out of your way to do it, right? If it's not relevant, you don't really need to mention it. But if you can find a situation where you can talk about how deeply you understand the language, it's like key. And then most importantly, which is why it's all in caps, is talk through your thoughts, especially on the phone interview. If you go for like a serious period of time without talking, without kind of warning us about that, right? It's cool to be like, okay, I need a second to think and then take that time. But if you don't talk to us, we don't really know what you're thinking about, right? So you can get through a ton of solutions in your head, but if you don't vocalize that, it's really hard for us to understand what your thought process is. So communication and talking through your thoughts is really, really important. And that if that's something that you struggle with, can be very much something that you practice with your friends. Some of the common mistakes we see is, once again, staying silent. Happens so much, and it's really frustrating when you're interviewing someone because you as an interviewer want to help them get to the solution, but you can't if they don't talk at all. Not talking through your solution before coding it. This is kind of what I mentioned earlier, but a little bit different. A lot of times I'll see a candidate say like, okay, I think I understand this problem, and then they'll just start writing code on the board. You want to explain what your solution is, like what are you going to do before you code it, just so that way if it is going in the wrong direction, the interviewer can correct you. Not being willing to take input is another thing that I see a lot. And I think I've kind of alluded to this, but the interviewer is there to kind of help you get to a solution. If they are giving you input and you are saying like, oh, that's not right, I don't think that's right, without kind of backing that up with anything, that can appear kind of standoffish, and it doesn't bode well for someone who's looking for like an engineer to fit within a team. So you want to be willing to take input, like listen to what the interviewer is telling you, kind of gauge where you can slot that in and go with it. A lack of technical knowledge is a common mistake. It's not really something you can like prep for. You either know the thing or you don't, right? But how you handle a situation where you don't know something is also very important, like I mentioned earlier. but this is where you can just kind of read. And while you're preparing, read books on whatever kind of technology you're trying to get into, or read, documentation, really trying to understand the technical knowledge behind what they're building or what their stack is really important to avoiding that common mistake. And then not thinking of edge cases. If I gave you a problem with a specific example, sometimes that example is like designed for like a happy path, right? And before you say, okay, this is my solution, think about, and when I say this is my solution, you've coded it up on the board and it's all done, right? Think about cases that would break that, and whether or not those are valid cases. Not thinking about edge cases happens so often, and it's really easy to, as someone who knows the problem, right, to just state an edge case and be able to break a candidate solution. So we want to see that, you're able to write code in production eventually, right? So when you're dealing with like actual customer data and actual customers or users, you don't want your system to break down if they're not using it exactly how you designed it to be used, because users will never use your system exactly how you designed it to be used. All right, I think we have a little bit more time than we were originally planning for, but that's kind of the meat of what I was going to talk about. I'm open to asking or answering any of your questions, so yeah, feel free to ask away.
Awesome. Thank you, Elton. So I'll just go down the list and then we can just answer them verbally.
Okay.
So the first two kind of have to do with recruiters. So what are some example questions that you should ask a recruiter during a call? And then the next question is, are there any tips for contacting recruiters? So I think they're two different questions, but maybe you could provide some insight there.
Yeah, I can go through it like how it would happen chronologically. So I assume when you're saying contacting recruiters, it would be like reaching out to a recruiter once you've like applied to a company, or before you apply to a company, to kind of make that initial connection. So a good resource for this would be LinkedIn. Try to find any person that you have at that company, even better if they're a recruiter. But if they're not, you can contact them via LinkedIn and ask, hey, do you happen to know any of the recruiters at this company? Could you put me in contact with them? That's one way to do it. I think that LinkedIn is probably your best resource here. So I would do a search for the company, and then you can kind of filter it by recruiters. And if you just message them like, hey, here's my situation, here's kind of what I'm looking for. I was wondering, if you could help me out in any way, or if, you have any open roles that you're currently looking for. And I mean, that's the recruiter's job, so they're probably going to get back to you about it. Keep in mind though that via LinkedIn, recruiters do get messages a lot. So try to stand out in some way, like read their profile, figure out a way to personalize your message rather than just kind of sending something general. So the second question, what are some questions that you should ask the recruiter during the recruiter call? This is kind of situational, but in general, try to probe as much as you can. Ask about like, what are the interviews going to be like? What kinds of questions are they going to ask? Like, what level of engineer is interviewing you? Those are good ways to kind of approach it generally. You could also ask the recruiter, general things about the company, right? Like what brought them to the company? Like where were they working before, and kind of what was the differences that they saw there? Like stuff like that, right? Anything that you can understand about the company or who's going to be interviewing you is fair game for that recruiter call. And don't be afraid to ask any question that like you're curious about. Like they are there in that call to answer your questions. So just go for it, I would say.
Okay, next question. Are you familiar with the roles and expectations of a technical communicator?
Technical communicator. I don't think I've ever come across someone with that like exact title. I think the closest I've seen would be like someone who writes documentation for software, which is what I assume that would be.
Okay. Yeah, Paul, if you want to type in the chat box with a little more explanation, we can come back to your question. Okay, next question I think is about company culture. So just talk a little bit more about company culture and what's an example or some examples of what you
Uh,
mean by company culture.
that's totally fair. I was really general about it. So company culture can mean a lot of things. It can be something as simple as like, are people more inclined to stay into the office until like 11 p.m. every day, or is there more of a work-life balance? It could also be something more complex, like how much investment does the company actually put into uh, developing its employees? Like, so is there some kind of system for reimbursement for like taking Coursera courses, for example? Um, I think that that all falls under company culture. It's when I say company culture, it could also refer to like what is the team size and how do teams interact with each other. Um, is there a lot of bureaucracy within a company, right? Like these are all things that are kind of underneath the umbrella of company culture. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it's really the vibe. It's the vibe
It's yeah,
of
actually that's probably the best way to put it. It's a vibe.
yeah. Okay, next question. So how do you include metrics for personal projects where there wasn't really people who used said project? Are you then automatically at a disadvantage?
No, not at all. I wouldn't say you're at a disadvantage. I think the important thing to note is using metrics helps. Not using metrics doesn't hurt you. So if you have a project um, where like you didn't have users, but you kind of did something that was cool and meaningful to you, um, just because you can't state metrics for it doesn't put you at a disadvantage. So I would just talk about that project on your resume. And I mean, like I have projects like that too. Like I built an app back in college that like didn't even launch, didn't get used by anyone. But on my resume, I talk about what I aimed to do with that application and just kind of showing where you were going with it and what the potential impact could have been, um, given certain constraints or if you had launched it or whatever it is, whatever the project is, right? Um, that's another way to go about it. But just because you don't have metrics doesn't mean you're at a disadvantage.
Got it. Okay, next question. How much do employee referrals matter?
A lot, I would say. It's not like someone who's referred is automatically going to get hired over someone who isn't, but being referred by an employee at a company can basically get you through to the first stage of interviews automatically. So if you know someone who works at a company who is willing to refer you, it can be very helpful. And I think a lot of companies also employ some kind of like referral kickback for that person as well. So if they refer you and you get hired, then they'll get like some kind of compensation for that as well. So I would say it's generally better.
Okay, so the next question is pretty beefy. It looks like a series of 5 questions, so we'll
Oh,
start off.
okay.
So, so what do you usually ask them, the company, as a question when they ask if you have questions for us?
Mm. So this is where my little trick here, and this is what I do, is a lot of times when you are doing a phone screen or something, you will get the name of the person who is interviewing you. I try to look them up on LinkedIn and see what their experience is. And I ask them kind of experience like questions about that. So if they worked at like one company and then moved to this company, or they were originally an engineer and are now a manager, right? I'll ask things about like what motivated them to do that, and what was the reason at this specific company, or what was the avenue at this specific company for them to be able to do something like that. You can also ask questions about products that they have, right? If they make multiple products at a company, you can ask a question about which one, um, that specific interviewer thinks is more interesting, because you are also kind of like looking for what product you want to work on as well. um, but I think this is your opportunity to show how much you know about about the company, like how much you've researched about them. So I would ask questions that kind of showcase that a little bit. Should I just go to question 2? Just go through all 5 of these.
No, I think I'm going to skip down to the third one because I think some of the other people have the same question. And it's
Okay.
really, um, I search and most companies are looking for college students with 5+ years of experience. So, what do students do if they don't have work experience yet?
Yeah, so this is kind of the circular issue here, right? Like companies are looking for someone with 5+ years of experience, but you can't get that experience if no one is willing to hire you. So it kind of goes around in circles in the sense that like there's not really an entrance. Um, totally understand it. I felt the same way when I was graduating. You're gonna want to look for something that has um, 1+, 2+ years of experience. If it is saying 5+ years of experience out of college, that's going to say two things to you. First thing, it's going to say that the technical recruiter or whoever is writing up the job posting is not very in tune with what is actually being asked for of that candidate. Probably not a good company for you to want to work at. So that's a big red flag. The second thing it could be saying is that it might not actually be an entry level position. It could be a typo. Happens all the time. Um, so, I mean, just as much as people make typos in their resumes, like recruiters make typos on the job postings as well. So, if it is saying 5+ years of experience, but it also says college, uh, like university recruiting, or if it falls under the university recruiting umbrella, um, you're probably okay with applying to it even if it says 5+ years of experience. If it says 5+ years of experience and college student, but it's not under like a university recruiting umbrella, like it just says like software engineer or even, bigger red flag, senior software engineer, you probably are not qualified for that position. So I would just look for another position at that company if you're really interested in working there.
Mhm. Thank you. So, Paul just got back to us and just said yes about the technical communicator role. Someone who writes documentation for software. Is that typically done by a person specifically hired for that role of documentation, or is that something, say, an engineer would do concurrently with his main responsibilities?
I would say that that depends on the organization. If the company is larger, like if it's like Viva, which is I think 3,000 people now, or if it's like Google, which is even bigger, they're most likely going to have someone specifically writing documentation who has like a communications background. If it's a startup like Gantri, which is the company I'll be joining in a week, that has like 25 people, a lot of people are going to be wearing multiple hats. So an engineer might be writing documentation in that case. It really just depends on the size of the company and kind of once again that vibe, like what is like kind of the work culture there.
Got it. Okay, going back over here to the Q&A, it looks like if I'm graduating from CS, it is a fact that I am able to code. What is the purpose of memorizing all the algorithms?
That is a good question. I You make a good point. I wouldn't say memorize the algorithms. It's more display that you have a fundamental understanding of what they mean. Um, so if you don't know depth first search or like breadth first search or binary search or binary search or merge sort or anything, right? Like even I forget them. Uh, Being able to kind of get an algorithm or derive an algorithm based on like the parameters of a problem is a way to show that you actually understand the fundamentals of computer science. Um, when you have those things, what I'll say is when you have those things memorized, like you know how breadth first search works and depth first search works um, on a fundamental level, it makes getting to solutions a lot easier. It's not necessarily that we're looking for that like actual just rote memorization knowledge. It's more just the ability to apply the fundamentals of that knowledge.
Hmm. Okay, so next question. And I think this kind of goes back to what you were saying, but there are normally way more things expected compared to what we actually learn in school. And then he provided some examples. Should we still apply to that job if you've never done some of the things that are on the job description?
I would say it depends. I err on the side of just go for it, right? It doesn't hurt to apply, but it's more of something, right? Like if you're finding that you don't know like 90% of the things that they're asking for, your first step should probably be like look up those things and figure out how difficult it will be for you to learn them eventually. Because if you're going to do that job, you're going to have to learn those things if that's what they're looking for. And then the other question to ask yourself is, do you really want to learn those things for that job? Is it like worth it? But yeah, if it's like a majority of the things, you're probably not going to get a response. If it's like 20% of the things you like don't know, that's really not as big a deal. I would still err on the side of like apply and see what happens. Because the worst they can say is just no. You're not going to get blacklisted because you applied to a position you're not qualified for.
Got it. Okay, so I don't have professional experience or internships. I've worked as a bicycle mechanic for 4 years, and I'm now looking for a software engineering position. How do I make myself more marketable?
Ah, totally understand this. I mean, my first internship at PG&E, I thought there was more competition than there was a ton of competition for that internship, I think. But the only experience I had before that was I taught guitar and I was a barista. So my approach to like getting a cybersecurity internship was just like, hey, here's what I'm learning in school. I want to learn more. Um, that would be cool. And that I think the fact that you showing that you want to learn something is really important to getting a job. You could also go for an internship right out of college, which doesn't, I think a lot of people think has a negative connotation, but isn't really the case. Um, if you don't have professional experience, it's a good way to get into the industry to get like an internship, because all internships in tech are going to be paid for the most part. And then if you do excel really well and kind of showcase that you can do the job, you will get a return offer, and then it's basically just like getting hired full time. Um, and so that's one way to do it. The other way to do it is work on projects. Side projects are really important. If you don't have professional experience, use some of the free time that you may have to work on something that really interests you, and something that you're passionate about, whether that's like building something with a technology that you like, or whether that's like building something for like a hobby that you really enjoy. So if you're a bicycle, if your experience is like with bicycle mechanics, I think is what you said, um, maybe build like some kind of React app or some kind of application in general that has something to do with that, right? Like tie what you want to do in with what you currently do, and that'll show kind of that you're able to make that transition. Um, all experience is good experience. I will end with that. So even if your experience isn't directly tied to tech, the fact that you have something, is important. So I wouldn't devalue that.
Okay, so I've scrolled down a little bit just to kind of get some variety going, but do tech recruiters care
There's
about
a lot of
non-tech?
questions.
Yeah. Do tech recruiters care about non-tech related experience?
um, oh yeah, totally. Um, I think it's interesting. I mean, obviously, tech recruiters are going to look for like the base requirements, right? But if you meet those base requirements and then you include some kind of like non-tech experience that kind of goes above that or shows something different, that can be really valuable as well. For example, my resume has, my positions as like software engineers and some of the classes that I've taken. It also has the fact that I was like president of a student org, which is completely not related to tech, but it shows that I have like leadership experience. Um, and so even if it's like not related, that does come across to tech recruiters, because if you're in like a leadership position, or even if you're in like some kind of retail position, um, you do learn stuff from working with other people and like communicating that is very applicable within a company setting.
Okay. I think everyone's wanting to know, how long did it take you to land your first job?
Um,
How
Oh
many
gosh.
jobs did you apply to before getting it?
So many. I don't even remember the original count. I very much embraced the shotgun method. I think I applied to like 200 something jobs and I got 3 offers at the end of the process. Um,
Wow.
so don't be discouraged is what I'll say. So much so that my friend actually, one of his side projects was an application that just sends you rejection emails every day. So you get used to it mentally. Because it's just like, it is the nature of the industry. There are just a ton of people in computer science. And don't take it personally, like if you don't get hired at every company you apply to.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay, so we are almost at time. I think we could probably do one more question. And I do want to just let everybody know that this is recording and we will make this available to you all through the Career Center. So I will be in touch just in case any of you are concerned about that. So let me scroll through some of these last questions. Um, Sorry, I should have read something.
I think I saw it too.
If I get my first internship, we'll just do this one. Should I accept it and just have it under me regardless of liking the environment or the pay? Should they just take should anyone just take an internship just to get that under their belt?
If you don't have options and the internship is in a field that you want to get into, I would say go for it. Because at most, you end up really liking it, right? Like in best case scenario, you end up really liking that position in that company. Worst case scenario, you know for a fact what you don't like. So I have always said that bad internships are just as good as good ones. So I would say go for it.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Elton, so much for the wonderful presentation. I really appreciate you doing this for us, and I'm sure the students really got something out of it this evening. And like I mentioned before, we are not interviewing, we are recording this presentation, so we will make that available to you all. And just know that this is a series that the Career Success team is starting to do, and we have another webinar on April 30th, and it's how to get hired in a non-tech role at a tech company. And Shane Hillers will be presenting from Google. So thank you all for tuning in and have a great night.